In 1905, Richmond, Virginia, Rose Jennings stood by a row of 32 grave markers behind her farmhouse, her gloved hand brushing dried soil from a newly set headstone engraved with the name of her latest husband, Elijah. Each grave was the same shape, same spacing, and same strange omission. No records of any funeral services, no county-issued death certificates, no confirmed witnesses. Neighbors recalled her as lean and precise, always in black even before her first husband's death, with a voice so calm it made even a sheriff hesitate. Local gossip first stirred when livestock dealers noticed she always sold off her late husband's tools within a week, each sale preceded by the same statement: "He won't be needing these anymore." The Jennings property was registered under her name since 1897, rare for a woman of the time, especially one with no surviving kin. Her farm ledger showed 32 mail entries between 1898 and 1905, all signed only once. Why did no one ever ask where the bodies were buried? To outsiders, Rose Jennings was a model of early 20th century resilience, a land-owning widow who tended her 40-acre farm with quiet discipline, her black bonnet always tied, her scent of soap and liniment unmistakable. But in a 1906 probate court entry, a clerk flagged that her last 3 husbands had wills notarized by the same dead witness, and none of their kin had ever come forward. The investigation began. The first to voice suspicion was Edwin Harrow, a tinsmith who lived half a mile north of the Jennings property. On the morning of April 12, 1905, he walked into the county clerk's office with a folded sheet of parchment, blotched with oil and stamped with the seal of his trade. He claimed he had recently serviced a stovepipe in the Jennings home and found something unsettling. In a sworn deposition later archived at the Richmond Historical Society, Harrow stated, "The lady was courteous, but the smell wasn't right. Not like animals or rot. It was lime, heavy, clung to the floorboards." Jennings's farmhouse stood at the edge of a declining pine wood, its fence sagging in places but always freshly painted. Her porch creaked under the weight of planters arranged in precise symmetry, all filled with white petunias and chrysanthemums, no color. Every morning she walked the same loop from barn to shed to well, apron pressed flat and face concealed beneath a wide straw hat. Harrow said she never asked about the work, only stood in the doorway watching, silent. The odor, he reported, became a recurring note. In May of the same year, a traveling seed merchant, Victor Laney, made a routine delivery to the property. In his pocket diary, found years later by his nephew, Laney described the visit. "Miss Jennings ordered rye and cabbage, paid exact coin, never looked me in the eye. Behind the house the wind caught a door ajar and I swear the stink burned my throat, like damp chalk and burnt feathers. No official complaint was filed. The local sheriff at the time, Morris Bledsoe, had known Rose Jennings since her first marriage to Daniel Harrow, a cousin of Edwin. In a statement made decades later to a local reporter, Bledsoe admitted, "I didn't see no bruises, no blood. Just a quiet widow with a fine ledger. That wasn't rare in those days, plenty of women remarrying to keep farms afloat." But it was precisely the ledger that began to unravel things. County tax assessor Gertrude Veal, a meticulous woman with wire-rimmed spectacles and a strict hairbun, began noticing discrepancies in Jennings's property filings. Between 1898 and 1905, Rose filed tax claims for spousal exemptions a total of 9 times. On paper, each husband had died of natural causes, though no official physician's notes were ever attached. Most concerning was the reuse of the same witnesses, a John Keeling and a Marjorie Watts, names that did not appear on any census records or voter rolls within the district. Gertrude sent a private inquiry to the Office of Vital Records in Richmond, requesting certified copies of each death report associated with Jennings. Weeks passed. When the reply came, it confirmed only 3 registered deaths, all for unrelated Jennings men in other counties. None matched the names in Rose's files. The ground beneath suspicion shifted when an aging gravedigger, Cecil Brand, came forward with a quiet admission. At a local tavern one rain-lashed evening, he confessed to a pastor that he had delivered 8 coffins to the Jennings property between 1900 and 1904, none accompanied by clergy, undertaker, or next of kin. Each was paid in full with cash wrapped in oilskin and left under a stone by the gate. They were plain boxes, Brand recalled, "not fit for long rest." And she always pointed to the same spot behind the orchard, like she already had the plots marked. The orchard behind Jennings' farmhouse had long been a source of envy. Apple trees, pruned meticulously, bore a strange uniformity. Each tree was exactly 4 paces from the next, and though the soil in that region was known for being acidic, Jennings' harvests were among the county's largest. A local woman, Sarah Croft, who helped Jennings can preserves one autumn, later told her daughter, "That orchard felt wrong. The earth had no worms, no birds ever came. It was too quiet." Sarah also recalled a narrow shed near the orchard with a padlocked door. She had never seen inside. But once, during a thunderstorm, she took shelter under its awning and heard a strange metallic dragging from within, followed by a low, rhythmic clatter, like chains on loose stone. Still, no one questioned Jennings publicly. In early 1905, she announced her engagement to Elijah Wren, a carpenter from Albemarle County. Elijah was 53, twice widowed, and known for his skill with joinery. He had 2 adult sons who lived in Charlottesville and saw little of their father. Elijah moved into the Jennings farmhouse in June. By mid-August, he was dead. According to the farm's own records, Elijah succumbed to an ache of the lungs on the morning of August 17th. The death was reported by Jennings herself at the post office in town. No doctor attended. The coffin was ordered the same day, and by sunset Elijah was in the ground. What triggered real alarm was what came next. In early September, Elijah's eldest son, Nathaniel Wren, traveled to the Jennings property to collect his father's tools. He found the house empty, the barn locked, the windows shuttered from within. He knocked for nearly an hour before Rose opened the door a single inch. She said nothing, Nathaniel later wrote to the county magistrate. Her eyes were dry and distant. "I asked for his saws and chisels. She replied, 'They're not his anymore,' then closed the door." Nathaniel returned the following day with Deputy Lemuel Hart. Together, they approached the farmhouse. Rose was seated on the porch, darning a shirt that clearly did not belong to her. She greeted them with polite detachment and declined entry, stating she was grieving and would comply with any formal order. Deputy Hart later recorded in his report, "The place smelled of bleach, not faintly strong, and the grass near the orchard was recently overturned, as if a plough had run over shallow soil. But no crops were planted." He filed for a warrant that same week. The warrant arrived on September 14, 1905, signed by Judge Whitlow Taves under Article 12 of the Virginia Civil Compliance Act. It granted Deputy Hart and 2 court-appointed observers permission to enter the Jennings property and examine any outbuildings, burial sites, or private ledgers relevant to Elijah Wren's death. At dawn the next day, the party assembled quietly at the edge of the Jennings orchard. The house did not stir. Mist hung low over the ground, clinging to the hem of the deputies' coats. The air smelled of damp linen and wood ash. When they knocked, no voice answered. When they tried the door, it creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow hallway lined with jars of preserves and framed photographs, none of which included Jennings herself. Inside, the farmhouse was tidy to the point of obsession. Every corner swept, every curtain drawn. A pot of coffee sat untouched on the stove, still warm. In the parlor, a ledger lay closed on the writing desk, its spine cracked from use. Hart opened it gently. The pages were filled with rows of male names, each with a date of arrival, a brief list of belongings, and an initial beside the word departure. The last name entered was E. Wren, with a departure date of August 17th. His possessions were marked as absorbed. The observers, William Drysdale and Horace Nettle, both clerks from the county office, took written inventory of the house. In the root cellar, they found shelves of canned meats, sealed jars of pickled eggs and sacks of lime, far more than a single farm would need. In the pantry, a leather satchel held 8 wedding rings and a stack of folded death notices, all unsigned. When they reached the shed by the orchard, they found the padlock removed. The door hung slightly open, its hinges rusted and groaning. Inside, the light caught on a heavy wooden table, stained dark at the corners. A row of hooks lined the ceiling beam. A saw rested in a shallow basin, still wet from recent cleaning. Hart approached the back of the shed, where a second ledger was tucked behind a crate of seed. This book was older, the pages brittle, ink faded. It contained diagrams of the orchard with numbered plots and initials beside each. 32 plots were marked. Each matched the number of visible grave markers behind the trees. "What is this?" Nettle whispered. "A catalogue?" They followed the diagram to plot 32. The soil there had been freshly turned. Hart ordered a temporary dig. Within the first hour they reached a pine box, crudely nailed shut. When opened, the smell forced all three men to step back. The body inside matched the physical description of Elijah Wren, salt and pepper beard, scar on the left temple, but his hands were bound with cotton rope and his shirt was torn at the collar. A coroner was summoned. The autopsy, conducted in Richmond 3 days later, concluded that Elijah had died not of illness, but of mechanical asphyxiation, consistent with compression by cloth or ligature. His ribs showed signs of blunt force, inflicted less than 24 hours before death. Word of the discovery spread quickly, though local authorities kept the investigation discreet. No arrest was made immediately. Instead, Jennings was placed under quiet surveillance, while Sheriff Bledsoe attempted to locate living relatives of her previous husbands. Few were found. The names on her ledgers led to ghost trails, men from outlying counties, recent immigrants, seasonal workers, and 2 listed simply as boarders. Back on the property, the orchard became the focus. Over the course of October, under court order, 15 more boxes were exhumed. Each contained a male body in various stages of decomposition, all buried without proper rites. Several bore signs of injury, fractured wrists, broken clavicles, and in one case a rusted nail still embedded in the forearm. Each grave had been packed with lime to speed decay, each box unmarked. Still, Jennings made no statement. She remained inside her home, watching from the parlor window as the orchard was undone tree by tree. Witnesses later said she never appeared angry or distressed, only tired. In mid-November, the Reverend Thomas Gray, who had once counseled Jennings after her first husband's death, requested to speak with her. He was allowed to visit under supervision. In a letter preserved in the church archives, he wrote, "Rose received me at the kitchen table, hands folded, her tea untouched. Her speech was clear, but her eyes wandered. She said she never lied, that all the men came to her freely, that none were missed." The same week, a report surfaced from a former domestic worker named Dinah Stokes, who had lived with Jennings for 1 season in 1902. In a notarized affidavit, Stokes described a strict routine, meals at precise times, forbidden access to the orchard, and the nightly ritual of Jennings walking the perimeter of the property carrying a lantern. "She never went to bed before counting the trees," Stokes wrote, "always in threes, always allowed." By the end of 1905, 32 bodies had been confirmed buried on the Jennings land. Of those, only 11 were positively identified through physical description or personal effects. No motive was formally declared. Jennings' estate was frozen, and a forensic accountant combed through her finances, which revealed a disturbing pattern. With each husband, her assets grew modestly. 1 plot of land added, 1 debt dissolved, 1 cart replaced. It was never enough to draw attention, but it suggested a deliberate structure. On December 3rd, a final search of the attic revealed bundles of letters tied in blue ribbon. Most were replies to personal ads from regional newspapers, men seeking wives' employment or salvation. Some included photographs, others contained money orders. None were sent by Jennings herself. The documents were dated as early as 1896. When questioned again by Deputy Hart, Jennings finally spoke more than a sentence. Her voice was measured, as always. "They were all willing," she said. "No one came here by force. And when they couldn't stay, I made sure they rested." She refused to elaborate. The case moved from inquiry to prosecution in the final week of December. A sealed indictment was issued. The orchard, now stripped of its trees and ringed with white flags, was declared a restricted site pending trial. That winter, snow fell early. Neighbors said the land stayed strangely warm. On January 4th, 1906, the state appointed Franklin Bowyer as special investigator to oversee the Jennings case. Bowyer was a former railroad auditor, lean, dry-voiced, known for his methodical mind and aversion to publicity. He arrived in Richmond by train, carrying only a valise, a wax-sealed logbook, and a list of names already flagged by the Office of Civil Records. His first visit to the Jennings farm was brief. He arrived unannounced just after dawn, escorted by 2 deputies. The frost had hardened the ground, leaving the orchard like a graveyard of stumps and shattered roots. From the porch, Jennings watched them dismount without a word. She wore a grey wool shawl and held a cracked porcelain teacup that steamed in the cold air. According to Bowyer's notes, preserved in state archives, her calm unnerved him more than any sign of violence might have. He wrote, "She gave nothing. Not resistance, not emotion. Only the sense that we were uninvited guests in a place already decided." He began by requesting access to the farm's private correspondence and bookkeeping, both of which had already been logged by the county but not yet transported. To his surprise, the farmhouse ledger was missing. The deputy assigned to catalogue it, Julian Mears, swore he had last seen the book locked inside a sealed trunk in the pantry. When they forced the trunk open, it contained only sacks of salt and a broken mirror. The first major contradiction emerged 3 days later. During a cross-reference of Jennings's known husbands, Bowyer discovered that one of the men listed in the county ledger, a Benjamin Torrance, had also appeared in a land dispute in Dinwiddie County in 1903. In that file, Torrance had filed a grievance against a neighbor, signing with full name and mark, 4 months after the date listed in Jennings's record for his supposed death and burial. A mistake seemed unlikely. Both signatures matched. But the address given in Dinwiddie was later found to be empty, and when deputies were sent to verify Torrance's presence, no trace was found. Neighbors there recalled a quiet man who stayed to himself, but none could confirm when he had last been seen. The file vanished from the county clerk's office 3 days later. Clerk Alice Dandridge filed a complaint, noting that the log of visitors showed only one name that day, Reverend Thomas Gray. Gray denied involvement, but when questioned further, he became evasive. He admitted he had once corresponded with Torrance on a matter of scripture, but claimed no knowledge of his fate. When asked about his earlier visit with Jennings, Gray hesitated before replying, "I only ever found mercy in her house. If she sinned, it was in silence." Bowyer pressed harder. He traveled to nearby counties to collect advertisements placed under the name Rose Jennings, or variations thereof. He found no less than 28 matrimonial notices between 1896 and 1905. Each described a widow of means, seeking companionship and partnership in agricultural labor. All were nearly identical in phrasing. Each listed a different address, most of them traced back to the Jennings farm or adjacent parcels. What disturbed him most was that many of the men who responded to these notices were not reported missing. They had been forgotten. Drifters, veterans, late sons of rural families, most with no remaining kin, no property, no recorded trade. In February, snowmelt revealed a second burial area beyond the orchard, previously overgrown with thistle and blackberry. Deputy Hart noticed the ground shifting after a night of rain. Excavation uncovered 3 more coffins, their contents unidentifiable. Each had been wrapped in canvas, nailed shut with scrap metal, and buried without lime. These were not on the orchard map. Bowyer now faced a pattern that exceeded neglect or chance, but just as he began preparing a case for premeditated homicide, a series of key documents vanished from the county courthouse. The parcel records for the Jennings estate, including land transfers, mortgage receipts, and tax remissions, disappeared from both physical and copied ledgers. A clerk found the index book soaked in lamp oil and partially burned, with only 4 pages left intact. The fire had not spread. It was intentional. Sheriff Bledsoe, aging and increasingly under pressure, stepped down from his position in March. He refused all further interviews. His replacement, Warren Key, attempted to impose stricter access control on evidence, but the damage was done. Rumors spread that someone in the clergy or judiciary had protected Jennings from the beginning. Letters published anonymously in the Richmond Gazette claimed that a certain circuit judge had officiated 2 of her early marriages privately and refused to file them with the court. The Gazette refused to print the judge's name, citing lack of verifiable source. Tension in the community escalated. Children were told to avoid the Jennings land. The Baptist Women's League revoked her name from the Widows' Registry. Yet still she remained untouched by indictment. Her home was watched but never entered again. Bowyer, increasingly frustrated, made a direct appeal to the governor's office for emergency authority to move Jennings into temporary detention for psychiatric evaluation. The request was denied. No formal charge had yet been upheld. No jury had been convened. In private correspondence to his sister, Bowyer confessed, "There is no pressure from law or finance that explains this silence. It is something else. A long shadow passed hand to hand. Everyone here knows something, but no one will say it." On March 19th, another body surfaced, this time not on the Jennings land but in the James River, some 15 miles west. It was the body of Julian Mears, the same deputy who had first catalogued Jennings's ledgers. His throat was cut, his wrists bound. No personal belongings remained except a strip of parchment sewn into the lining of his coat. A list of names, all men, some with check marks beside them. Mears had not filed any formal report in the days leading up to his death. His last recorded statement was a single-line entry in the property logbook, "She knows the dates." That entry was erased the following morning by unknown hands. Bowyer returned to the Jennings farm one final time in late March. This time she met him outside. She wore black again, as she had in every known photograph. Her hands were bare despite the cold. She said nothing until he addressed her directly. "You've buried more men than this state has executed in 20 years, he said. Jennings tilted her head. Her voice was soft. "And yet the land is quiet." She turned and walked back toward the house. No further search was conducted that spring. The orchard remained fenced off. The townsfolk avoided it entirely, but the questions had now reached every level of the state judiciary, and Bowyer was no longer the only one asking. As April unfolded, tensions around the Jennings farm reached a quiet fever pitch. Local tradesmen stopped delivering supplies. The town's blacksmith, Orville Jett, refused to repair her wagon axles, citing illness each time she sent for him. Even the postmaster, who once had casual chats with Rose about rainfall and barley yields, now dropped her mail at the gate without so much as a knock. But Jennings, as always, behaved as though nothing had changed. She tended her rows of bare soil, replaced the porch curtains with white ones, and sent regular payments to the church, never attending service. She maintained her routines with such eerie precision that one could mistake her for a woman untouched by public opinion, unaware that every eye in Richmond had turned toward her. Franklin Bowyer, meanwhile, faced increasing resistance. Requests for access to church registries were denied. Clerks who had spoken freely weeks prior now claimed poor memory. Several key documents submitted to the county archive under seal were declared misplaced in transfer, including the affidavit from Dinah Stokes and the orchard ledger with its burial diagrams. More troubling still was the growing inconsistency in witness accounts. Edwin Harrow, the tinsmith, who had initially alerted officials, now claimed he had never entered the house at all. When confronted with his deposition, bearing both signature and fingerprint, he dismissed it as a fabrication. "I remember smells," he told Bowyer, "but not that house. Not her." Sarah Croft, the woman who helped Jennings with canning in 1903, moved away without warning. Her house was found vacant, a single uncashed church tithe still pinned to the wall. No forwarding address was left. Of the 28 known respondents to Jennings's matrimonial advertisements, only 4 families stepped forward. All 4 later recanted or altered their stories. One woman, the sister of a man named Conrad Stills, provided Bowyer with a tin photograph of her brother, alongside a woman she believed to be Jennings. Within a week, she withdrew the image from evidence, stating it had been mislabeled. Bowyer began to suspect interference from within the clerical ranks of the county. He filed an internal grievance, accusing 2 court recorders of deliberately obstructing case progress. But the grievance was returned unsigned, with a note from Judge Arnsley that read, "Without living plaintiffs or direct confession, we are bound by absence, not assumption." The phrase disturbed Bowyer deeply. He had heard Jennings use it, almost identically in her only extended interview. Around this time, a man arrived in Richmond claiming to be the younger brother of one of Jennings's former husbands. His name was Wallace Phipps, a farmer from Pulaski County. He carried with him a dated photograph, a family Bible, and an envelope of letters written by his brother, Stephen, all addressed to R.J. Phipps was calm and lucid, with a slow voice and sunburnt skin. He asked to see the grave to verify the remains, Permission was granted. On April 21st, Phipps stood at the edge of Plot 19, hat in hand, as the grave was carefully opened under supervision. The pine box was intact, and the body inside bore clothing consistent with the description Phipps gave. But the face, after so many years, was unrecognizable. Phipps stepped forward, stared, then took a step back. "That isn't him," he said quietly. Deputies documented the discrepancy and prepared to exhume other nearby graves to verify possible reburials or mistakes. But the following morning, the grave was found resealed and the coffin missing. The guards assigned to the orchard swore they had seen no one enter or leave. The night had been quiet. No lanterns, no wheel ruts, no prints. Yet the ground was clearly disturbed, the soil packed harder than it had been the day before. Phipps vanished the next evening. His lodging room was empty, and the landlord claimed he had paid in full and left before dawn. His letters and documents were never recovered. That same week, a journalist from the Richmond Telegraph named Arthur Lyle published a full-page exposé titled "Widow's Orchard, a Catalogue of Disappearances." The piece included interviews, family claims, excerpts from public records, and a rough diagram of the orchard plot based on Bowyer's notes. Within 24 hours, the Telegraph retracted the article, citing inaccuracies and concerns of slander. Lyle was let go. His notes, which he kept in a lockbox in his apartment, were reportedly stolen in a break-in 3 nights later. Nothing else was taken. Bowyer now suspected a coordinated suppression of the case, but he had no authority to prosecute anyone within the judiciary, clergy, or local administration without formal charges. He submitted a final petition to the state attorney's office requesting Jennings be held under house arrest pending further investigation. The request was received, reviewed, and denied. With all formal channels blocked, Bowyer turned to his logbook. He began writing nightly entries, documenting each missing file, each altered statement, each individual who had recanted or vanished. By mid-May, the log contained over 70 pages. He was last seen on May 16th, departing the Richmond rail station with a copy of the orchard diagram folded in his coat. His destination was never confirmed. Neither was his arrival. Jennings, meanwhile, remained in her house. She now tended only one side of the property. The eastern field, once planted with cabbage, had been left to seed. The orchard was silent, the fences rotted, and still, no charges were filed. It was the rain that revealed the final structure. On the night of June 3, 1906, a storm moved across eastern Virginia, bringing hours of steady, pounding rain. By morning, parts of the Jennings property had turned to marsh. The western edge of the field, long unused and overgrown with sedge-grass, slumped inward, revealing a shallow depression and a partially collapsed roof of brick and timber. Co-farmhand from the neighboring Bertram property, Hugh Tolliver, first noticed it while driving cattle past the Jennings fence line. He saw water funneling into the depression like a drain, steam rising faintly from the warm earth. When he approached, the soil gave way beneath his boots, revealing the rotted beams of a concealed roof just beneath the surface. The sheriff's office was contacted. Within 2 hours, Sheriff Warren Key and 2 deputies arrived at the scene. Jennings did not interfere. She watched from her porch, unmoving, as the men roped off the area and began removing earth by hand. By sunset, they had uncovered a brick stairwell descending into the ground. The entrance had no door, only a rotted wooden frame and a rusted hinge. The air that rose from the opening was heavy and sour, like wet metal and spoiled grain. Deputy Caleb Morse descended first, lantern in hand. The steps led into a narrow corridor, low-ceilinged and uneven, with timber supports bowed from moisture. Along the walls were rusted nails where tools once hung. A low humming sound could be heard, not mechanical, but the resonance of water moving through narrow channels. The corridor ended at a heavy oak door, banded with iron. Despite its weight, it swung inward with little resistance. Inside was a room no larger than 15 feet across. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, each filled with labeled glass jars and folded parchment. In the center stood a butcher's table, gouged deeply along the grain, its legs bolted into the floor. A second ledger sat atop it, open to a page marked Samuel T. The date beside the name read April 1899. The room had no windows, no ventilation. Chains hung from the far wall coiled neatly, unused for some time. A locked chest stood beneath them. When pried open, it revealed an assortment of items: watches, belt buckles, hand-stitched notebooks, and letters addressed to names no longer found in any county record. Behind the shelves was another door, half buried in soil that had collapsed from above. Deputies worked by lantern light for hours to clear it, ignoring the stench and rising heat. When the second chamber was finally opened, they stepped back. The room was darker, damper. Along one wall were 7 pine boxes stacked vertically. Each was sealed with rope and wax. 2 bore initials scorched into the wood, EW and CS. In the far corner, beneath a mold-darkened tarp, they found an upright cabinet. Inside, wrapped in muslin and wax paper, were formal portraits. Men seated stiffly in 3/4 profile, each with the same backdrop, a plain wooden chair and the corner of the Jennings parlor. None of the portraits included Jennings. None were marked with names. Word spread quickly. By morning, journalists and townspeople had gathered outside the Jennings property, blocked by a cordon of mounted deputies. The Richmond Herald published an article within hours titled "The Widow's Room." It was pulled from newsstands the same day without explanation. Governor Edwin Lothair issued a public statement calling the discovery a matter of grave concern, and ordered the site sealed pending state investigation. But already, photographs had been taken, sketches made. The contents of the underground room could no longer be silenced. Jennings was taken into custody without resistance. She was dressed for travel, gloves on, hair pinned beneath a plain bonnet. When asked if she had anything to say, she responded only, "The order was always mine." The chambers were emptied piece by piece. An inventory was conducted by Deputy Morse and Court Clerk Harriet Vess. The final log included 68 labelled jars containing handwritten notes, 73 personal effects, and 11 sealed coffins. Each coffin was opened in the county barn under official supervision. Inside were preserved bodies in various states of mummification, each wrapped in muslin and bound at the ankles. Several wore wedding bands. One clutched a rosary. All were male. The townspeople reacted with a mixture of silence and private horror. Churches held closed-door vigils. Children were kept home from school. Neighbors who had once defended Jennings now refused to speak her name aloud. What shocked most was the consistency. Each victim had been cleaned, dressed, and bound with careful symmetry. No visible injuries, no signs of struggle, as if they had simply lain down and waited. One final discovery brought the investigation to a point of irreversible dread. Hidden behind a false wall in the second chamber, beneath a loose panel, investigators found a journal bound in black oilskin. It bore no name, only the embossed initials RJ. The entries, written in a sharp, slanted hand, were undated and unsigned. Each described the arrival of a man, his clothes, his habits, his sleep. Some entries ended abruptly. Others continued for pages. One read, "He does not speak while eating. He sharpens his tools before bed. He sings when alone, always the same hymn. I do not think he has anyone." Another read, "He wept on the 3rd day. I waited until morning." The journal made no mention of violence, only observation. Names were never used again after the first entry. Each man became the guest. The final entry read, "No more arrivals." The land is full. Jennings was held in a temporary cell within the Richmond courthouse, placed under continuous observation. The small windowless room had a single cot, a basin, and a steel door with a sliding panel. She spoke to no one for the first 3 days. Deputies noted that she neither cried nor protested, nor did she ask for legal counsel. Her meals were returned untouched, except for tea. State-appointed physician, Dr. Ruthven Sloane, conducted 2 interviews. His report, submitted to the office of the state solicitor, noted the subject's dispassionate tone, complete orientation in time and place, and unnerving consistency in her phrasing. She addressed all questions in the 3rd person. "She never refers to her husbands by name," Sloane wrote, "only as those who arrived." The logbooks and preserved journals from the underground chamber were reviewed by forensic archivist Madeline Vane. Her analysis identified at least 6 unique handwriting samples across the various note jars, suggesting that some men had written under supervision. Many entries were brief: weather, diet, simple reflections. Others hinted at restriction. One entry read, "Asked to walk the field again, permission denied." Another, "Dreamed of my sister's music, forgot the tune before waking. Days are short, not permitted paper after dusk." None of the notes contained dates. Vane observed that they had been stored in preserving alcohol and wax-sealed, a method used in early laboratory specimen preservation, uncommon in domestic environments. The sealed coffins held the most damning evidence. Autopsies conducted in a temporary field lab confirmed consistent cause of death in 9 out of 11 remains: oxygen deprivation, likely due to controlled suffocation. All victims showed no signs of struggle or restraint trauma, but several had worn through the cloth at their wrists and ankles, as though they had been bound for extended periods before death. The state coroner noted traces of laudanum in 5 of the bodies, an opiate commonly used as a sedative at the time, but toxic in high doses. The quantities found were enough to render someone unconscious for hours. The doses were not uniform. Some victims had more than others. The discovery triggered a legal debate in the capital. With no surviving plaintiffs and Jennings offering no admission, the state was divided on how to proceed. Governor Lothair refused to declare the case a criminal proceeding until charges could be based on named victims. Judge Taves, who had signed the original warrant, was reassigned days later without public explanation. By mid-June, protests formed outside the courthouse. Some demanded a trial. Others believed the woman should be left in silence, that no justice would equal the scale of the act. Then a second cabinet was found. Workers sent to dismantle the Jennings farmhouse came upon a false wall behind the hearth. Inside, covered in soot and wrapped in muslin, was a tall wooden cabinet sealed with wax. It was pried open under court supervision. Inside were 12 sets of male clothing, folded and labeled. Each bore a strip of muslin with a single embroidered word: a virtue or occupation. Builder, miller, clean, faithful. Folded beneath each outfit was a photograph. All of them featured Jennings, seated beside each man, hand resting gently on his knee or shoulder. All were posed identically. None had been displayed in the house. At the bottom of the cabinet was a metal tray containing dozens of rings, some engraved. One read, "Until all is peace." None of the items had been documented in any will or estate claim. Forensic staff also uncovered a final envelope, folded into the seam of the cabinet lining. It was addressed simply, "To the next who wonders." Inside was a note, written in the same hand as the black oilskin journal. It read, "They were chosen with care, not for what they had, but for what they lacked. Each was an echo. I gave them place, rhythm, and stillness. That was the agreement. The rest is yours to name." News of the cabinet's contents spread beyond Virginia. Reporters from Baltimore and Philadelphia arrived within days. A sketch artist for the Philadelphia Clarion published an illustration of the underground chamber that quickly circulated in national weeklies. Jennings was dubbed the Black Widow of Virginia by headline writers. Under pressure from the state assembly, the governor's office finally authorized a formal inquest. The proceedings began on July 3rd, held in closed session. Only legal counsel, state forensic experts, and 4 selected witnesses were permitted inside. Among the witnesses was Deputy Caleb Morse. During his testimony, he reportedly described the moment he lifted the first jar from the shelf. "It wasn't the writing that shook me," he said. "It was the neatness. Like someone had catalogued a collection, not preserved lives." When Jennings was brought into the chamber to identify the cabinet contents, she remained silent. Only once did she speak. "They asked for quiet," she said, "and I gave them soil." The statement was entered into record. It was the only line from her that the inquest officially preserved. The inquest closed on July 10th with no formal indictment. Legal scholars argued that without confirmed identities for at least half of the victims, the charges could not hold. The case passed into bureaucratic limbo. Jennings was remanded to a holding facility for psychiatric evaluation. But in the public eye, the verdict had already been reached. The orchard was raised. The fields salted, the house dismantled, piece by piece, and yet no one moved to claim the land. Rose Jennings never stood trial. Following the inquest's inconclusive ruling, she was transferred under quiet escort to the Fairhall Asylum for Women, a state-run institution located 30 miles outside of Richmond. The transfer was registered without ceremony, her name listed under a medical notation rather than criminal classification. Her admittance form stated, "Subject displays extreme detachment, calculated behavior, no evidence of delusion or psychosis." Contained pending review. She was assigned to Ward C, reserved for long-term containment. Staff were instructed not to ask her about the orchard, the names, or the cabinet. Dr. Ruth Van Sloan submitted a formal objection to her placement, arguing that Jennings showed no signs of mental illness by clinical standards. His appeal was denied. Over the following months, her case fell from the headlines. A heatwave in August brought a string of typhoid deaths to Richmond's West End, redirecting public attention. The political climate shifted. Governor Lothair did not seek re-election. No memorial was ever held for the victims, whose graves remained unmarked, sealed in vaults under state supervision. At Fairhall, Jennings maintained her routines. She refused to speak during group observation, participated in daily chores without incident, and once requested a spool of muslin and a needle, which was denied. Her letters, if she wrote any, were not preserved. No family ever visited. In the town of Richmond, her name became something muttered, then omitted. Her farmhouse was cleared, the land leveled and fenced, though no new construction was permitted. Locals referred to it only as the lot. Children dared one another to run its perimeter after dusk. No one ever crossed it twice. By 1908, the case had become a cautionary tale taught in Virginia's law schools, an example of procedural paralysis when bureaucracy and fear collide. A paper published in the Richmond Law Review titled "Absence of Corpus, the Jennings Loophole" examined how legal definition, lacking formal charges and named kin, created an immunity rooted not in innocence, but in invisibility. No further investigation was opened. The cabinet and its contents were sealed in the State Archive basement, catalogued under restricted access. But silence did not mean peace. In 1909, Harriet Vess, the court clerk who had inventoried the underground chambers, took her own life in her boarding room above the carriage depot. Her final note, written in pencil on a ledger margin, read, "They were placed in rows so they wouldn't feel lost." Deputy Caleb Morse left the force in the same year. He relocated to New Jersey under a false name, later discovered in census records as Martin Clay. When asked decades later why he left, he told his granddaughter only, "Some fields grow more than roots." The orchard, long stripped and salted, began to shift again. In the spring of 1910, a surveyor mapping drainage lines for the county reported an irregular heat pattern in the soil, visible through his portable thermal gauge. Though dismissed as a calibration error, a second reading confirmed it. Temperature variance centered directly above the former burial grid. No official action was taken. Back at Fairhall, Jennings' health declined. In October of 1911, she suffered a stroke, leaving her partially paralyzed on the left side. She continued to dress herself, eat unassisted, and refused all medication. When a new nurse, Eliza Kramer, asked her whether she regretted anything, Jennings reportedly replied, "They stayed longer than they would have, had they been free." She died in her sleep on December 2, 1912. No autopsy was conducted. Her body was cremated per state policy for unclaimed remains. The urn was sealed, labeled, and stored in a holding shelf at Fairhall. Decades later, during renovations, the shelf was found empty. No record of the urn's release or relocation exists. The site of the Jennings farm was purchased in 1913 by a private investor from New York. The land was cleared again, surveyed, and prepared for residential development. Foundations were laid for 6 homes. But within a year, all construction ceased. Workers complained of unstable soil, collapsed trenches, tools gone missing. By 1915, the investor abandoned the project. The land was resold, then left fallow. To this day, it remains undeveloped. In a quiet corner of the Richmond State Archive, among forgotten maps and weather records, The orchard diagram still exists. Faded, torn at the edges, it bears a single annotation not found in the original ledger. A red circle drawn in ink around plot 17. The initials once inside that circle have been erased. After Rose Jennings' death, Fairhall Asylum entered a period of institutional decline. Staff turnover increased, funding decreased. Within 5 years, the facility lost accreditation and was absorbed into a larger state hospital complex under a new name. Most patient records from the earlier period, including Jennings, were transferred, misfiled, or destroyed in a fire that consumed the third-floor storage annex in 1916. The cause of that fire was never determined. Some said faulty wiring. Others whispered that it began in the archive room. No one was injured, but the original logbook from Jennings' intake, the only full document linking her confinement to the Orchard case, was lost. In 1921, a Richmond journalist named Byron Edge began researching the Jennings case for a retrospective series on forgotten legal anomalies. He spent months gathering old newspaper clippings, interviewing descendants of witnesses, and requesting access to sealed files. Much of what he found had already vanished. Court exhibits missing, correspondences burned, photographs without labels. Still, he persisted. In 1923, he published a short serialized column titled The Orchard and the Widow. The response was tepid. Few readers remembered the case. Many thought it fiction. But Edge's interest drew the attention of one remaining survivor, Eliza Kramer, the nurse who had attended Jennings during her final year at Fairhall. She was 87 when Edge found her, living in a boarding house outside Charlottesville. Her memory was brittle, but her description of Jennings never wavered. She never raised her voice, Kramer said. Even when her left side gave out, she kept dressing herself. She said pain was something she knew the shape of. Edge asked what Jennings said in her final days. Kramer hesitated. Then she recited a phrase. She said, "All of them were waiting for stillness. I only gave them the hour to arrive." Edge included the line in his final article. Then he disappeared. His last known letter, addressed to the Richmond Historical Society, mentioned an unnamed source who claimed to possess the original Orchard ledger. He wrote, "If this is authentic, then the numbers were never 32. They were only the ones who stayed." The letter was dated November 3rd, 1923. He was never heard from again. Years passed. The field where the Jennings house once stood remained empty. Locals used it as a shortcut, but no one lingered. Children made up games about the orchard's ghosts, though the place was never tied to the supernatural in official accounts. In 1948, a small municipal building was constructed nearby. During foundation work, laborers discovered stone fragments buried in a grid. County engineers dismissed them as remnants of a failed irrigation system. No further excavation was allowed. Only one man questioned it, a surveyor named Patrick Rowe, who had worked the Jennings lot during his apprenticeship. In a letter to his son, he wrote, "The stones weren't for water. They were markers. Even now I think of them lined in silence, like they're still waiting for something to be finished." The letter was never mailed. It was found in a drawer after Rowe's death in 1962. By the mid-century, the story of Rose Jennings faded into historical footnotes. Her name was omitted from textbooks, her case absent from legal compendiums. No statute was ever amended in her name. No memorial was built for the victims. But the orchard lingered in memory. Old residents near the original Jennings land reported strange frost patterns on the soil. Photographs taken for agricultural reports showed mist rising from one corner of the field on clear mornings. A librarian once claimed that a list of missing men filed in 1902 had been removed from the county index, only to reappear decades later with additional names added in identical handwriting. No investigation followed. And yet in a locked drawer of the Richmond archive, the cabinet ledger remains. Yellowed, brittle, bound in wax thread stitching, 32 names in ink, each crossed out in identical fashion, except one. Plot 17, circled faintly in red, bears no name, no date, and no mark. The initials that once filled that space were scraped away, not by accident or time, but by blade. The cut marks are deliberate and recent. No one has checked the soil beneath that plot since 1906. If this story moved you, if you made it to the end, it's because you also feel that these hidden truths must come to light. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way we'll know how far these stories reach. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering them. This story was reconstructed from documents that were found. All names have been changed to protect the source.